Okay, well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this virtual meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Commission, quite possibly the last virtual meeting. I'm Peter Southgate, and I'll be chairing the meeting this evening. I'd like to introduce my colleagues. Councillor Peter McCabe is my Vice Chair and Chair of the Healthier Communities panel. Councillor Brenda Fraser chairs the Children and Young Persons panel. And absent today, in fact, is Councillor Aidan Mundy, who chairs Sustainable Communities, but Councillor Henry, you are substituting. Thank you. In addition, Councillor Paul Kohler, thank you. Councillor Billy Crystal, Councillor John Dehaney, I'll ask John in a minute who he's substituting for, Councillor Nick McLean, and Councillor David Chung. In addition, Mansour Ahmed is our co-opted member. Welcome, Mansour. So apologies for absence. I note a few, so perhaps, John, you can tell me who you're substituting for. Can you unmute, John?
Chair, if I may, Councillor Dehaney is subbing for Councillor Ben Butler.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Chung, welcome. You are substituting for Councillor Stanford?
That I understand, yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So that's apologies. Any declarations of pecuniary interest? There being none. And the minutes of our last meeting, can I take those as an accurate record? I'll take that as assent. And are there any, just checking, I don't think there are matters arising. Good. Okay, let's say how we're going to organise this evening. I'm going to take the equality and community cohesion strategy first. Everett Willis will be talking to us about that, to be followed by the item on universal credit. David, thank you for agreeing to reshuffling the order there. So let's go first with the equality and community cohesion strategy, and let me invite Everett Willis to introduce that. If you can, Everett, fairly succinctly. Okay. And I think then I'm going to ask members to focus their questions on the narrative part there, which is just the first 3 or 4 pages. And then we can go into the detail of the action plan as members wish. Everett, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Good evening, everyone. I'm Everett Willis and I lead on equalities in the council. Sorry, my role is externally focused. Annually, I've been coming to this commission to update on the current strategy. And apparently the activity that the detail of the presentation is in Appendix 1, because what Appendix 1 is the action plan, all our commitments in the strategy to tackle inequalities and promote good equal opportunities in the borough. That's all outlined in Appendix 1. But the current strategy, that expires this year, and the approach we took in developing it was to have something aligned to services that evolved as services evolved, and was much more targeted on services rather than almost like a scattergun approach or being accused of a tick box exercise. We've embedded inequalities into the day-to-day business of the council. That's borne out by the fact that our savings proposals have equality analysis accompanying them. That's an integral part of the equalities performance of the council. What I've outlined there is just how much each department has contributed to developing this current strategy. And I think it's fair to say that we were in some areas ahead of other authorities and even nationally in terms of how our partnership approach, for instance, with the voluntary sector on many things. And the start of the pandemic, the council working with the voluntary sector was able to set up the community response hub. That has taken a lot of work and energy and partnership from across like colleagues in this meeting, voluntary sector. A lot has gone there. So in some ways, the detail of the action plan, there might be some areas with slight underperformance. But that's because all resources were focused on tackling the pandemic and the range of inequalities that surfaced over a period of time. One of the things that we've done is commission BAME Voice, the infrastructure organisation for minority communities in the borough, to do a piece of research on the impact of COVID-19 on the local BME community. Now, the research has been done, a final report is being finalised, and it will be presented to the Health and Wellbeing Board on the 25th of May. After that, it will be something that we hope the recommendations can be used across the partnership to improve the life of our local communities. I'm not going to go through the detail of the report because I think you've all seen that. I think I'm happy to take questions on what's happened. But going forward, the strategy needs to be refreshed, as I've said. And my aim is to get this launched next April, the start of the next financial year. It aligns with service plans and also in terms of the timetable here with overview and scrutiny. And in developing the strategy, I'd like to take the strategy even as an outline to the Scrutiny Commission, overview and scrutiny, so that you can have an input and comment on it as it develops. And then before it would go to Cabinet or Council, again, it would come here. But in terms of developing that new strategy, a lot of things around health inequalities that we already knew and what we've learned in the last sort of 12 months will inform the strategy. As a council, we've put commitments together to deliver, to improve lives of particular communities that have been highlighted a lot in the media in the last 12 months. Some of the Black Lives Matter issues have they've been reviewed in the council. For instance, the issue of lack of diversity at the top, lack of senior BME officers at the top. That is something we already had in train doing, but now the council is working closely with the staff network, the Race Equality Network, and just consulting on and reviewing policies and so forth. We've also been chosen as a pilot site for the Workforce Race Equality Standards. And this is a national standard that's usually for adults and children social care, but we're using the principles across the corporately across the council. Things like digital inclusion, there are a number of things, and your Merton engagement, lots of things will contribute to the strategy. And I'll say now, if you have any particular areas that you'd like to see us committed to doing in the strategy, just the themes, for instance, I'm happy to take those now. But I think it's better to just take questions on the specifics that you may have.
Okay, thank you very much, Everett. So lots of things have been going on. Do members want to comment or ask for further explanation or detail of those? Paul, Councillor Kohler.
I've got sort of 6 specific questions. How do you want me to do it? Do you want me to do them in turn or do them all? What's the best way of doing it? We'll
take a couple of them, Paul.
No, I really would like to see all of them, actually. Starting on paragraph 10, I see the new online recruitment process. Is that going to include name-blind recruitment? As you'll be aware, the online equality training lauds name-blind recruitment, and yet we don't have it within the council, which is a bizarre contradiction. So I'd like to know whether that's going to include name-blind recruitment. On paragraph 14, talks about domestic violence. I'd like to hear how, in light of the amendment that was passed unanimously last week, our approach will change, or how you are proposing to address the issues we asked you to address in the amendment. On paragraph 16 on our stamp-free access, have we given up on Rains Park now? And I see no mention of Hayden's Road. Hayden's Road would be the easiest one to give step-free access to because it was actually in the planning permission granted. The developer had to give step-free access. So it's quite beyond me why we're not pushing there, which should be such a low-hanging fruit.
Paul, can we take those three and then I'll come back to you for the remaining three?
Thanks.
Okay.
Okay, could I ask Chris? Chris, are you able to respond to these?
Yeah, happy to. And just to explain, Chair, since Rachel Wardell left, she was chair of the Council's Corporate Race Equality Steering Group, the Council's Equality Steering Group, and I volunteered to take that responsibility. So I'm working closely with Everett on these matters and hopefully bringing forward the next plan that you'll see. But just turning to the specific question, starting with name blind recruitment. If Liz Hammond was here from HR, she would hopefully update on this. But this was considered when we were replacing the HR system that we currently operate, and it would have been an additional amendment. Now that's not ruled out. We can buy that additional piece of functionality to the HR system. But if you look at the data on recruitment, what you'll see is that the problem in terms of recruiting BME staff, it's at the interview phase where blind recruitment wouldn't make a difference. And indeed, up until that phase, in terms of shortlisting, in terms of long listing, we are reflecting the community that we serve and the population at large. It really is an interview phase, and that's where the effort is being put in order to ensure that as far as possible, certainly for senior positions where that disparity is more acute, that we have black members of staff on the interview panel. Now that's more challenging because there are fewer of those staff at senior management positions, but that's the decision that CMT has taken and is seeking to put in place. So blind recruitment hasn't been ruled out, but currently it would be in addition to the HR system. But as I say, it wouldn't solve the problem that we currently face. In terms of the domestic violence, Kiran Bagawal and I with Kath James are looking at the recommendations that came out of the council meeting and looking at how we can further improve our domestic violence arrangements, and we'll be coming back with further detail on that once we work that through. In terms of step-free access, Rains Park is almost certainly in the too difficult to deal with box for Network Rail at the moment, unless or until Crossrail 2 comes along and that station can be dealt with. There's more positive news around Motspur Park, where we believe that is possible now, and we believe that that's been added to the list, and Network Rail are working through that. Wimbledon Park, as the report says, has had planning consent, but that's really now contingent upon TfL's financial deal, which we hope will be resolved after the election. And in terms of Hayden's Road, I'll need to take that back out from this meeting in order to check why that's not at the moment coming forward as a design scheme and being implemented. But when I last checked, it's not on the list of Network Rail schemes that's in flight.
Thank you, Chris. Let me come on to Councillor Gretton. Ed.
Yep, thank you very much, Peter. I've got two questions. I'll just ask one now, and if I've got time for a second one later, I'll ask it both brief, but particularly on, specifically rather on Wimbledon Park Station and the step-free access there. I mean, TfL, I had the funding ready about 18 months ago on Wimbledon Park step-free access, and actually all the works mobilised, everyone, you know, arrived on the ground, and, you know, prior, just as a pandemic was kind of getting going. And then since then, everyone seems to have just gone home. Nobody's seen anyone from TfL. The whole build was meant to take about 10 weeks, and the TfL keeps saying it's happening, they're coming back. And I thought, you know, generally all construction work was meant to be carrying on over the last year, but specifically railway infrastructure was meant to carry on as a priority. But nobody's seen or heard of TfL there for well over a year. So what's going on with Wimbledon Park step-free access, and why isn't TfL coming back, and what's the council doing to encourage them to keep in line, to bring it to an orderly close and finish the project?
Chris, I think that's one for you.
Yeah, I think it's entirely contingent upon the financial settlement. As we know, in the last 15 months, TfL's financial position has significantly deteriorated. Our own LIP programme has massively shrunk. We only have 48 days of a normal annual LIP allocation to spend at the moment, and that's indicative of the financial position that they're in. The evidence and the information I have is that is affecting the delivery of Wimbledon Park Station. We'll continue to press them. And I think that should become more clear exactly what their intentions are after May the 17th, which is the date when they anticipate that they will be able to have a financial settlement, and will continue to press the case for Wimbledon Park.
Thank you. Let me come back to Paul for your other questions, Paul.
Thank you. On paragraph 20, things are improving with our NEAT figure, our NEAT ranking, and yet the Universal Credit Paper paints a very bleak picture. I was just wondering if you could reconcile what looked like two very opposite stories is coming in there. And lastly, actually, the last one I'd like to ask about is something that's missing here, anything about asylum seekers. Now, we have been pressing the council, asking about joining in the Lift the Ban campaign to lift the ban on asylum seekers working. We've found it very difficult to get an answer from the council on its attitude to this. So I'd like to ask that question now. Is the council minded to support the Lift the Ban campaign, or is there a problem in so doing?
I could start with the Lift the Ban campaign. The council is in favour of this, so there is going to be a report going to Cabinet to get that agreed fairly soon. And the figures about need, I can't comment on any sort of contradiction there. I'd need to contact colleagues in children's schools and families for clarification, but certainly the colleagues that do work with young people, and we've got quite a good relationship with the voluntary sector as well. I think, you know, it has been difficult, but those figures are accurate, and they are doing some good work with young people. And one of the things that the council is looking at in terms of from the grants is how we make sure that the sort of grassroots organisations out there that can sort of divert young people from getting themselves in trouble, educate themselves, give themselves the skills. We support them to be able to deliver and help us as well to deliver those services. So I'll come back to you on the specifics though.
And what role are apprenticeships playing in the council's mind at this stage?
Apprenticeships is something the council is committed to. Again, any sort of detail from that would come from my colleague Liz Hammond, who's the head of HR, but there is a commitment, and the council currently has apprenticeships. Obviously, with the pandemic, lots of things have just been thrown into disarray to some point, but there is a commitment, and that's the thing that I think we need to, those are the sorts of things we need to bring out stronger in the new strategy, for instance, how we really make sure that our young people are skilled academically, vocationally, to be able to live fulfilling lives as adults.
Just to add to that, if I could, Councillor Kohler, sorry to just put in, but the council's also volunteered to be a kickstart employer. So we will be taking on, I think it's a 25 to 30, 16 to 25-year-olds as soon as we can move out of the pandemic, because that does require face-to-face contact with those individuals. So that will almost certainly be from July onwards.
Okay. So I'll come back to Councillor Gretton. You had a second question, Ed?
Yeah, unless anyone else had a question, I wanted to go first.
No one's indicating at the moment. But
okay, thank you, Peter. Yeah, just looking at the equality appendix 1, which is on page 9. It's the equality cohesion strategy over a number of years, and the very first one that's named, saying this is the equality objective number 1, and the very first one that's mentioned is the need to reduce health inequalities, and particularly improve life expectancy in less affluent parts of the borough. So that's the number 1 equality objective as stated in this report. And I think I've got a simple question, which is, as every GP surgery across the whole borough of Wimbledon and Mitcham, all GP surgeries wrote a letter saying that the best way to address that objective was to get behind and accept the government's £500 million investment in the new hospital services in our borough. And as every GP surgery wrote that, and that's the number one objective in here, to improve life expectancy, why do the council spend such a long time trying to oppose that when this is the number one health objective in the council's actually defined?
Well, I can't. Well, I will comment on the objectives. It's at the top of the list, but they're not in any specific order as priority. They're all equal priority. But that particular point has been an objective in the strategy for the last 4 years. So again, this is why I was saying we, in some ways, were already ahead and started to have some of the evidence, and now with the pandemic. And hopefully with the report that we're getting from VME Voice, we should be able to start addressing some of those issues and really tackling preventative, introducing preventative methods, because that's what's needed in lots of ways. And economics, it's a whole package. There's a lot. It's a holistic approach that's needed.
Thank you.
I have a question. In fact, this is on para 12, in reference to the Recovery and Modernisation Programme. And this crops up, I feel we're all meant to know about it, but in fact, we don't, do we? And when I do a search on it, I can't find out very much. So,
okay, Chris, I think I'll give you this one to respond to, please.
Yeah. So this is the title given to a very broad-based programme of activity that CMT, and particularly Jed Curran, commissioned about a year ago, when we were starting to better understand the implications of COVID, and thinking particularly about the way the council worked. So the programme includes a number of activities around responding to, or taking some of the positives from remote working, for example, and the way that staff are operating more from home, looking at the ICT investment that we need, and looking at the field-based working and the technology that staff need to work remotely, but also a number of other activities alongside those core recovery and modernisation tasks that have been added to the programme, including the action plan that developed out of Black Lives Matter. There are some other elements, including transport activity and some joint work with community and housing and children's schools and families around looking at how we make the passenger transport service more efficient, and looking at how we work in partnership with the voluntary sector around activities to support vulnerable households more quickly, so as to avoid cost and the impact on those individual households. Happy to circulate that programme in its entirety. It's overseen by Frank Dick, an interim member of staff who's employed by the council for probably about 18 months to help with the development and the implementation of that. And CMT meets every week on a Thursday afternoon as a recovery and modernisation board in order to oversee the delivery of that programme, because most of the activity is cross-cutting and affects every department. But happy to share that programme at a future meeting here if you wish, Chair.
Yes, certainly. I would like to hear that. Councillor McCabe.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to respond to Councillor Gretton's remarks. He's asked why the council has spent so long making its opposition clear to the proposal to move the hospital A&E maternity services to leafy Belmont in Surrey, away from the deprived community that I represent. And I think the answer is very clear. I take my instructions from the community that I represent. I know just how important St Helier Hospital is and has been to that community. And that used to be the policy of the Conservatives many years ago until the extremists took over, and we all know who they are. But I take my instructions and I look after the interests of my constituents as opposed to taking orders from Tory high command, who introduced the idea of a hospital in an election broadcast just before the last election, when Boris promised the new hospital to be built in leafy Surrey rather than serving the most deprived parts of our borough. And I make no apology for that.
Councillor McKay, was there a question?
No, it's a statement. It's in response to a question that was asked. Why has the council done it? As the person who led that, I think, Chair, I have a right and a responsibility to explain why the council's done that.
I'll take Councillor McLean and then Councillor Kohler.
Thank you, Chair. I think the use of the word extremist is completely inappropriate. Councillor McCabe didn't have the guts to name who he was referring to, but if that's the sort of language you're going to allow on this committee, then I think we're going to have a little bit of a problem. It's twice now he's referred to some councillors as extremists. It's not the language that one should expect in this discussion. Now, I would like to please all get back to discussing this report, put aside the politics, because it's a very important report, ask questions, stay away from the rants and the statements, and let's get back to this very important work that Everett has put a lot of effort and her colleagues have put a lot of effort in preparing. And let's get focus on the report.
Yeah, Councillor McLean, I would endorse, extremist, Peter, is not really the language for this panel, this commission, and we do want to focus on the issue of the report. I know you feel passionately about St Helier. Councillor Kohler.
Well, really, I'm going to echo what you've just said. Can I please ask Ed and Peter, let's not turn this into a political catfight. This is scrutiny. Party politics should not be part of scrutiny. We have to rise above it. And tempting as it is to make a jibe, Ed, please don't. Tempting as it is to respond, please don't, Peter. This is not what scrutiny is about. Okay,
thank you. And that's that on that one. Do we have? I do have some thoughts about the action plan, but
Chair, do I have a question?
Yeah. Yes, of course, David.
Chair?
Please, yes, go ahead.
Can I ask a question?
You can.
Okay, Councillor Chung. Following up on the issue to do with health inequality, east and west of the borough, the question I would like to raise with whoever can answer it, is a need to close the gap between east and west, and there need to be strategies in order to do that. I don't know what strategies are in place, but I would like to ask and to propose that every effort is made to work in the east of the borough on a macro strategy, which is probably going to deliver more effectively than if we tried to work on micro strategies, that is trying to raise the standard of living of individual workers in the east. We have, I think, an urgency to make sure that we get the Wilson Hospital up and running, because it is my understanding that should we do that, we can actually move some small way to improving and closing the gap between the east and the west. I wouldn't want to come back here in another 5 years and find that we're still in the same position we are now with regard to the Wilson. So could anyone in the panel or elsewhere give me some assurance that we are going to move speedily to getting the Wilson off the ground and operational? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Chung. I note your point on Wilson Hospital, and what I will be doing is feeding this back to Dagmar Zuna, who's the Director of Public Health. But your main point was about bridging the gap between the East and the West. That has been the focal point of everything recently, all the work that we've been doing, and the current equality strategy is attempting to do that. Now we have a health and wellbeing strategy that's new, and it's focused on trying to do exactly that, but a lot of it is around preventative work. It's about accessible services, and again, I hear what you're saying about Wilson Hospital, but I can't comment on that, obviously. But your approach, especially what you're talking about, the macro approach, that's exactly what we need to do. It's about taking a holistic approach and linking everything that we do. We have strong partnership in this borough, and in the role that I do, I meet a lot of communities, and what I've heard in particular, as for instance from the BAB community, is they feel their voices aren't being heard, the council doesn't listen. So there's a massive piece of engagement work that we will be doing, and some of the issues that our residents tell us, again, there's always, I can't make any assurances because it's always down to finances, and that's a political thing that I as an officer, I can't control, but it's my job, my colleagues' job, to put strategies in place that, regardless of the political persuasion of the borough, it's about what are the needs of those residents. It's evidence-based, and sometimes it's actually listening to some of those anecdotal things, trying to go out there, use different ways of engaging with communities. You know, hopefully we're going to come out of this pandemic soon, and we'll be able to go back to normal life. And I think it is really important for us, as part of that modernisation recovery plan, to do things differently, but taking that strategic approach to build in those considerations from the very beginning, so it's a seamless service. The consideration isn't adding on at the end. It's, again, what I've said at the beginning of my presentation, is trying to embed equalities considerations into our day-to-day business.
Yep, thank you.
That's how we'll close the gap.
Before we move on, Peter, I saw Mansoor's hand up. Did you want to ask a question or to comment on something?
John, I'll take your point and then I'll come to Billy.
Okay.
Yes. Chair, I've got a question.
Okay, good. Go ahead, Mansoor, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Everett.
Thank you.
As we have seen, Martin have successfully been accepted as part of the workforce race equality standard pilot. I just need to know, how would the learning from this piece of work would contribute to the revised strategy? Thank you.
Oh, that's an excellent question, and that is exactly what we'll be doing. The way the standards have been developed, there is a knowledge hub. It goes with practitioners for adult and children's social care, and all the learning from our pilot scheme and all the rest will be just brought into one place, and we have blogs and all the rest of it to share best practice. But the point of the RES is to look at ourselves on those standards, look at some of the data around who will be recruiting, who is leaving the organisations more, our training, learning and development opportunities, who's accessing them at which level, and just having a strategy in place to really grow managers, or being clear as to what the organisation is getting and how do you promote people. So yeah, and this is specifically about race, but it's meant to be just around the adult social care. But as I said, we're going to be extending it corporately. So it will mean things like us auditing the data that we have on certain things, like for instance, exit interviews. We need to get, I think, smarter at getting that information and see how we can advise, contribute to our recruitment and selection process, for instance, or our policies. So there's quite a lot to do. There's a bit of evidence gathering. We're at that stage. It's just starting off. But as I said, any lessons, especially if they contribute to the priorities that are emerging for the strategy, they'll certainly be used. But as I said, we haven't actually gone further than developing the plan. It really is at the beginning stage at the moment.
Thank you. Thank you.
Councillor Christie.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question on the part of the action plan. So on page 27, it's on the item about improving the take-up of childcare places across the borough. It's been reported elsewhere that many childcare providers during the pandemic have been struggling, given obviously the lower take-up and in fact reduced take-up, with many parents working from home and so not needing to send their children into childcare. And so given that our our objective here is to improve the take-up of childcare funding for 2-year-olds, as well as funding as well as funded places for 3- and 4-year-olds across the borough, could you, Everett or Chris, say any more about what we're doing to ensure that the provision will remain in the borough so that we can improve the take-up of those places for, the funded places for childcare in the borough?
It's not my it's my understanding that the funding, I'm not sure if there's going to be any sort of reduction. It was merely the fact that because the patterns of working changed in the last 12 months, there was less need for parents some parents either couldn't afford to send their children to nurseries or just didn't, and so that has changed. So I know colleagues in children's schools and families have certainly supported the nursery school sectors where they can, and they're still doing the targeted work around supporting families, and part of that will be to make sure that the children are getting taken up the funded places. So I know there is work going on, but I can't tell you the specifics, but what I can do is speak to a colleague who gave me that update and provide the Commission with a bit more information behind it.
Thank you.
I don't know, Councillor Christie, whether part of your question is an anxiety that some of those nurseries may have gone under during the pandemic and they won't be available. If that is the case, I don't want to put David Kepler on the spot, but David might be able to say something about how we're supporting businesses in terms of the grants that are available to sustain them during this period.
That would be helpful.
David, would you want to comment?
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Certainly on the business, so any nursery that applied for a discretionary grant last summer and met the qualifying criteria, I think at the time was a 50% reduction in income, would have received a discretionary grant from us. So the council's initial discretionary scheme did highlight or did target nurseries along with market traders, businesses in shared accommodation. So there was a specific scheme last year that was targeted towards them. The current grant scheme is open to all businesses within the borough. There's a slightly different criteria on that. We've lowered the entry level, if you like, to a 40% reduction. That scheme's just closed. We're in the process of looking at all the applications and hopefully awarding about £3.54 million worth of grants to businesses. And I'm sure there'll be some nurseries or childcare providers in there.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, David.
Okay. So if there are no further questions, I'd like to comment on the action plan in general terms, which is laudable, but we can't really measure the effectiveness of our actions unless we measure them, unless we have a way of calibrating whether from a baseline we're making improvements or not. So I spent some time this morning going through the action plan. I've come up with about 18 points, which I've put on a list where I think we need measurements which are not there at the moment. So I'd like, Heather, I'm not asking you to comment, but I'd like the members to endorse that we, who have seen these, that we do ask that they be taken into account, and where measurements can be provided in future, that we see those. So At the moment, there's a lot of narrative, but I don't get the hard figures to know whether we're improving or not. I mean, we've got something on, let's take the very first one on life expectancy. So we have a measure there that looks encouraging because it shows a reduction in the gap, but it looks to me like it's a pretty old measure, is it? And have we got anything yet that measures the impact of the pandemic?
Well, I think the update that's there from public health is the current position, because colleagues at the moment are doing a raft of stuff in public health to tackle health inequalities. There's just an endless list. Part of that also is around child healthy weight and food poverty. There's a lot that's been done to just link in to that, but I do agree. I'd be happy to look at that list and talk to colleagues about, because we've had this conversation before about having a base from which to start from, and you can measure to see, well, actually, are we actually going up or down? But the only word of caution sometimes with the statistics is behind that. Sometimes the performance might not be quite as it should be because of things outside of our control, possibly. But I think the key thing for us to do is to make sure that all the things we're saying that we're doing, we're actually doing it, and then on top of that, we're evidencing it, as you said, Peter, with the data. One thing about the race equality standard, a lot of it is data driven. It's making us look at how we collect our data and how we not just collect it, but what we do with it. And you're meant to look at data, analyze it, and look at the okay, so what is it that we need to do? That's precisely the position I think we're in, and as part of the recovery from COVID. We're going to have to be more evidence-based because sometimes that's where the funding's coming from. So it's key. I'll take that point back. So if you share it with myself, then obviously I can come back to you on it.
Yes, with the agreement of members, if we can do that. And Everett, I would just say that even if we're asking you to measure it, we're not necessarily expecting you to control it. You work with partners and...
Oh, yes, I understand that. No. Oh, no. Thank you for that, though.
Let me take Brenda and then Ed.
Thanks, Chair. I'm glad you brought up that point because I'm reading here and it just looks like a lot of words. And I personally would have liked to have seen some graphs or charts or something so that it become more explicit. And so I just wonder, having been to our meeting yesterday where we had lots of charts, but mind you, not enough color. So I just wonder if we could change the way it's written so that it becomes more focal, please.
Okay, that's fair point. Some of this could be presented in tables and so forth. Yeah, tabulate the information. Yeah, I think that's doable.
Good. And Councillor Gretton?
Yeah, thank you, Peter. I was just going to endorse what you suggested. And sometimes we sit in the scrutiny panels and they're very admirable, the statements, but sometimes they are a bit abstract. And we all like to see a really ambitious objective. And what are the best local authorities anywhere in the country actually managing to deliver? And and then we benchmark ourselves against that, if you like, and say whatever the issue is. How far away are we from that, and what measurements can we set out to actually track our journey in that direction? So whatever the measurements are which you're recommending, I'm sure they're all good ones, and I look forward to seeing ambitious objectives, but with the metrics to track how we progress towards that. The council's got tremendous resources, not just for councils, but also the partners of the councils in all these matters. And what we all want to see, I think, is that those resources being deployed properly and monitored with transparency, so we can ensure that the best possible progress is being made for our residents. Thank you.
Yeah, well, on that, we do monitor and there is transparency, but what we need to do is capture that information in the presentation to yourself. So I take that point. Thank you.
Okay. I think that there's something else I'd like that occurred to me that's missing from this actually, and it's any measures of mental health and the effects in particular of the pandemic on the mental health of vulnerable groups, children, the elderly, those with learning difficulties. Such evidence as we read in the national press tells us that these groups have been particularly disadvantaged, but we really need this in a local context. Everett, what can you tell us about monitoring the mental health of residents?
Well, that's something difficult to do, because it's about we can have data as to how many people have certain long-term illnesses and mental health. But in terms of people who actually come and engage for a service so that we can then say how we're helping them, I think it's difficult. I think what I continue to hear is that there are not sufficient services for mental health, and some of the small organisations, again, over the years folded for various reasons. And there's a lot of people getting support out there from those small organisations. So I think there's a piece of work to be done there. But the current health and wellbeing strategy does acknowledge mental health as being an area that needs some resources. So that's in there. And that is, I think, for everyone coming out of this pandemic, that's been high up on the list of where focus needs to be, because mental health of people of all ages right now is key to make people be in good mental health. But it's a lot of partnership working that's needed. So that's something that I'll be putting into the equality strategy. And I think where members, for instance, know of organisations that are working that way, is just encourage them to work with Merton Connected and grow as an organisation to be able to help people across the borough. I can't give you any direct numbers or anything like that, but I can say that it's been picked up by our colleagues in public health and across the council, because in all aspects of our work, we come across issues associated with mental health all the time.
Would you have, for example, figures from, say, South West London St George's mental health service that would tell us the level of demand and whether that is growing as you know, in over the last 12 months?
I mean, that's something that I could get from the colleagues, but I think maybe mental health is a possible theme for this as a theme for a topic for the scrutiny panels in the next few months or something like that, and do a targeted piece of work, and maybe some of that learning can help to address the various strategies that are being developed in the council and with partners.
Okay, thank you for that. Good, so unless we have other questions, we'll thank Everett and Chris for taking us through that. And Everett, we'll ask you to comment on this list of actions where we'd like to see, and you can tell us whether they're feasible or not.
Yeah, that's fine, because what I'll do, I sit on the Corporate Quality Steering Group, and Chris chairs that, and it's colleagues from across the council. So we look at those sorts of issues. And they've helped me to populate that action plan. So yes, we'll have that discussion. So thank you.
Good, thank you very much indeed.
Okay.
I may say I'm rather glad we've had this meeting, because I was thinking that, you know, we missed it a year ago, didn't we?
Yes.
As the pandemic first struck. So I was very anxious that we shouldn't let another year go by or without looking at the strategy, because it is important and it comes at a crucial time. So
definitely.
Thank you for writing it for us and presenting it this evening.
Okay, thank you. Okay, good night, everyone.
Thank you, Chris.
Here.
So let's move on. We'll bring
in... Hello. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, David. Yes.
Okay, right. I just wanted to pick up on a small point. I mean, the issue is going to be taken up again. I wondered if we can have some report back, not in another year, but maybe in say 6 months' time, because of the urgency of some of the issues that have been discussed here this evening.
Yeah, I think it would be good to get a progress report in 6 months' time, because in 12 months we'll be looking at what is hopefully the intended to be the revised strategy. So it will be good to monitor it as at the 6 month stage as it moves towards that. So error seems to have disappeared right now, but I'm sure we can look at one of our autumn meetings to have a progress report. I think it would be valuable. If members agree? Generally,
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. So let's come on to David. There you are. And to talk to us about universal credit. Again, this is one that's been postponed, isn't it? So I'm glad you're able to talk to us about it this evening.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So I'll just cover a few points on the report. I mean, firstly, the local authority isn't responsible for the implementation and administration of universal credit. So the information that I've got from you is from a knowledge of what's going on in the borough, and you'll see in the two appendices some information that I've received from the Mitcham Job Centre. So if I just take you through a couple of points from the report. Seems a long time ago now, universal credit commenced its rollout in Merton in 2016 for single working age claimants. Universal credit is just for working age claimants. Pensioners do not go on to universal credit. And by the summer of 2018, all new claims in Merton for working age claimants would have to apply for universal credit rather than housing benefit, apart from a couple of small exemptions around temporary accommodation and residents in supported accommodation. 2.7 just shows the reduction in the housing benefit caseload that we administer. Off the top of my head, back in 2015, we were probably paying out close to 95 million pounds in housing benefit. I think last year it was down to about 55 million pounds in housing benefit. So there has been a reduction in the number of claimants receiving housing benefit, which was always the aim of universal credit. So universal credit is assessed every single month, and often our residents will get changes in their universal credit every single month. If there's a change in their income, their wages, their salary, they will receive a different amount of universal credit every month. So the Mitcham and Malden, the Mitcham Job Centre, they had a new manager start there, I think October, September last year, and I made contact with him as I did the previous one. And fortunately, he sort of provided some information that I thought would be useful to the committee on, certainly on the numbers of claimants or number of residents in Merton in receipt of universal credit and unemployment benefit, and then also some of their development plans to address the increase. So Appendix A shows the numbers of universal credit claimants for both Mitcham and Malden and Wimbledon. It shows it for Merton collectively, and then a comparison for London and Great Britain. And you can see from that, so this data was given to me in November, Chair. So you can see from that the increase in claimants and the percentage increase within the last year. But he made it very clear when I spoke to him, although this is a report based on a yearly change, the reality is the change was from March until November, which makes sense with the pandemic. So you can see the different numbers, you can see the different percentages, how Mitcham and Malden and how Wimbledon compare for both 18 to 24 age group and for all working age residents. And then you can compare that across London and compare it across Great Britain. I think one of the things that he pointed out, and I think he pointed it out in his developments, was the larger increase in claimants in Wimbledon for 18 to 24-year-olds, 276% increase compared to Mitcham and Malden, which I think traditionally has probably had larger numbers and larger increases. So Appendix A gives some data, as I say, both constituencies across Merton, and it's comparable to London and Great Britain. what he's also provided under Appendix B is just some of their main developments that they're working on. I think the most striking one for me was number 4, where they've recruited 70 new work coaches in Merton, doubling the staffing resource. I understand that they're also taking over the old Merton Priory home site in Central Road. Now, I don't know whether that's going to be a job centre or whether it's just going to be office for these new work coaches. You can also see there some of the engagement that they do with the council that's ongoing. I know the team Future Merton, they engage with them, the Chamber engages with them, and to a lesser extent, I think myself and my team engage with them. It's slightly difficult for me because, as I say, I'm not responsible for universal credit in Merton. You know, I see it from slightly set aside from it. And I wondered, Chair, if in future the committee wanted a further update, whether you might consider actually inviting the manager along. He's very pleasant. It's very helpful, and I think you may find that more beneficial than listening to me, because he's the expert on it.
David, it's always beneficial to listen to you.
You're too kind, Chair. Yeah, I mean, that was it really. I mean, as I say, it's sort of, my report is really passing on a lot of information that I've received from them.
So as things stand, the Wimbledon claimants would have to go to Mitcham to, you know.
I think there's a mixture, because parts of our borough is serviced by Lambeth. A small part of the borough is serviced within Sutton. And I think even a small part of the borough is serviced by the Kingston office as well. Okay. So whilst Mitcham is the main office, different parts of the borough on the outside are actually serviced, or their job centres, their local job centres, are actually in different boroughs. So SM4, for example, parts of SM4 certainly have to go to the Sutton Job Centre.
Okay. Sorry, yes, questions. Peter, Councillor McCabe.
Thank you, Chair. I think one of the sort of not surprising but still very disturbing figures before us is the claimants in the youngest age group, and I think that's going to get worse, sadly, in the next few months when the furlough scheme comes to an end. We've read that younger people have suffered most, and I think if I heard correctly earlier on, Chris Lee was saying that we're taking on, as a local authority, 25 to 30 people on the Kickstart scheme. I know Chris is no longer around, and he's probably done a very long day, so no criticism for that. He was here for the last item, but I think that we must and should do better. There will be huge numbers of young people who are leaving school, graduating from university, and setting off on life's journey, and it's going to be the worst of times for them to be looking for work, and we have a responsibility as an authority to do all we can, and I'm absolutely sure that we can do much better than a mere 30 Kickstart places, given the size of this organisation and the responsibility that we have to the community that we serve. I hope this committee would agree that that's something that we should send back and ask officers to think again. My own organisation is taking on 30 young people. We're a tiny organisation by comparison with Merton Council, but I think it's incumbent on as many employers as possibly can to put their shoulder to the wheel at this difficult time.
Yeah, I endorse that.
Chair, I'll certainly go back to HR and I'll get some some numbers for you, just to confirm whether Chris's numbers were right, or certainly come back and I'll report that back through Rosie for you.
Yeah, thank you, David.
Here, can I come in?
Yes, please do.
Okay, I just want to pick up on Councillor McCabe. There was a report not too long ago by the Commissioner responsible for education. She was actually highlighting the fact that, I mean, unfortunately, about 1/3 of all students in our education system leave education without many qualifications. Certainly, they don't leave. They leave with less than 5 GCSEs. Now, that actually puts a big burden on the apprenticeship scheme. And I know we did touch on that in the discussion so far. But given that there is actually going to be what I think going to be a crisis for young people in terms of training and jobs and so on, I think it's actually incumbent upon us to put every effort that we can now to ensure that we can try to not fully address this, but at least go somewhere towards assisting young people in the crisis that they're going to be facing in the not too distant future. Thank you.
Just in the context of the last item too, I did note as we were going through the figures for NEETs. I know our numbers are low as a borough, but there's a category unknown NEETs. And I do worry about that. I think we need to understand rather better what's happening to the, well, I know it's almost a contradiction, what's happening to the youngsters that we're not managing to track. Brenda.
Thank you, Chair. It's probably just a statement. I probably should say that I should declare it then, that I'm a governor at South Thames Group of Colleges. What I haven't noticed in your papers is how we're working with the college. It's a huge college, it's 4 big colleges now. And we have quite a lot of apprenticeships, and we are attached to various organizations. We have lots of NEET students. We have students with lots of needs as well. And we really need to be talking to them. And some of our staff from the council actually are on the board as well, like Keith Shipman. Yeah, and so really, I've been with them for about 10 years or more. And so I do know what they're up to. But if you don't talk to them, you don't have that development, and we should be working in partnership.
So what I can do, Councillor, if it helps, I'll certainly go back to the job centre manager at Mitcham, and I'll ask him that question.
Okay, well, thank you.
Let me come to Councillor Kohler. Paul, you've had your hand up there a while.
Thanks, Peter. David, it's back to my earlier question, and it's something that Peter was just referencing. Can you see my problem? We're saying on the 18 to 24-year-olds, Merton's doing a lot worse than the national average, and yet we're being told in another report we're going up the NEET table. You know, we're doing better on NEETs. Is there an obvious reason for what looks like a contradiction to me?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to, if I'm honest, it's going to be difficult for me to answer because I haven't got the information, or I haven't provided the information that's come to you on the other report. And again, this has just been passed on to me, which I'm passing on to you. I can go back to Everett and query it with her. As I say, I wouldn't even know, if I'm honest, who would have given that information to her.
It goes back to Peter's point about having metrics, and we've got the few we have to be able to rely on, and there might be a reason for it. It just seems bizarre that those two figures seem to be going in opposite directions.
Yeah, certainly.
Thanks.
Okay.
It's probably worth noting, Paul, that the numbers here are quite low, aren't they? So I'm not offering that as an excuse, but the group of unknown NEETs number some 30 young people, and the other group working with South Thames College number 54.
I see that paragraph 20 looks really good in the diversity report. We've gone from 12th lowest to 8th lowest.
Yeah.
And then we see this report, which looks, alarming to say the least.
It's like when AFC escaped the relegation zone, they've probably only gone up a couple of points, haven't they? Okay, unless there are further questions. Brenda, do please come back.
This is the overview scrutiny. I'm listening to some of what's being asked, and they were at the CYP meeting last night in most of our reports. So in fact, what I think you need, and I'm not saying you have to do that because this is your domain, take somebody from the CYP section to come to this type of meeting so that they can answer these questions. Because we have got them in the papers and they sound bizarre sometimes until they're explained. And also there is a time lag for the reports because of COVID. So some of the report results that we have happened before COVID and some just in the middle of it. And so really, I think probably this is a CYP question. We should really be asking one of them to represent them, I think.
Yes, fair point. Unless there are further questions, David's suggestion that we invite the manager of the Mitcham Job Centre. David, if I can ask your advice, I'd wonder whether we should also be inviting somebody from the CAB to come along and talk to us, because they are really they're at the coalface, aren't they?
Absolutely.
The interface.
And they deliver a lot of the support for universal claimants who struggle to access some of the parts of the scheme. I think that's a good idea, Councillor.
So, Mansour.
Thank you, Chair. And thanks, David, for the report. So far, how many residents of housing benefit claims are left to transfer to universal credit? Or what is the percentage? And how long all remaining housing benefits claims would be transferred to the universal credit?
That's a very good question. I think all of them should have been transferred by about 2019. So pensioners will not be transferred. So of our caseload of 7,000, I think about 4,000 are pensioners. We have, I think, about 3,000 working age still. There will be a number of claimants in receipt of benefit in temporary accommodation or supported accommodation. I think probably at least half of that 3,000 will eventually be transferred. The DWP keep, or have in the past, they've given different deadlines on when they're going to transfer the rest of the caseload, and it's never happened. And I don't even think there's a date out there at the moment. It's hard to say at the minute when they may transfer over.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
So if I can just ask members to agree that we would like to hear from the manager of the Mitcham Job Centre, but also perhaps if in that same session we can get somebody from the CAB to come along and tell us how those who struggle with university credit are managing and how they help them. Because we do actually provide a pretty big grant to the CAB each year. Peter.
Chair, I think it would be helpful with CAB if they could conduct a survey of their service users to get a sense of how things are going from a benefit seeker's perspective. And I think that would be a very useful exercise. They have done something like that in the past, and it's been a useful way of bringing about change, because it's not inevitable that things go wrong. Sometimes it's just a process or something that a minor issue that can be changed, that can actually make a difference. And of course, with people that are on benefits, they're often really struggling. So I think that would be really worthwhile. And then at the risk of sounding like I'm defending the Department of Work and Pensions, I think before we're too critical of them for being too slow to make some of the changes that they'd planned, we need to recognise that in the last 12 months, they've had to cope with millions of new claims, and they've had to change the way they work, and they've had to they've had to do extraordinary things, I work with them, and I'm aware of the difficulties that they face, the challenges that they face, and I think we should be fair and recognise that also.
Okay, good.
Peter, just Peter,
yeah.
I've got just one request for David, if I may. Just when we see the data the next time, whether it's on universal credit, to what extent is it feasible to set the data out and have some information on the typical duration? So you show the number of claimants in the borough, but also a breakdown of the varying durations, if you like. So X percentage of persons might be on universal credit for a period of less than 12 months or 12 to 18 months or some 36 months plus. Is there any, is that available, that type of data?
I'll certainly ask.
Yeah,
I can certainly ask. Chair, I think if Rosie gives me an idea about when you want to have this back, I'll contact the CAB and the Job Centre, give them plenty of notice. I'll mention what Councillor McCabe wants. I'll mention what Councillor Grattan wants, and hopefully they'll be able to provide that to us.
Yes, thank you, David. Probably not before the autumn.
No, sure. So whenever, yeah, whenever.
6 months away. Yes. Good. And I do remember, probably Peter McCabe remembers this too. We used to get quite good data at ward level from the CAB on the proportion of our residents who were, dependent on benefits and so on, which stopped some years ago. But I'm sure the data is probably still being collected.
I'll ask that.
Yeah. So good. We have an agreement. We will come back to this from the perspective both of the Job Centre and the CAB. David, thank you very much again for
my pleasure.
Your report this evening.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Okay. Moving on. Oh yes, sorry. The demographic profile of councillors and managers on page 13. Can I say, as regards, make a suggestion here, that we had data from, just as far as elected members are concerned, we had data from some 39 of them, and probably the best way of capturing that data is when members are newly elected. So I don't see a lot of point in repeating that exercise before the 2022 elections next year. And perhaps we can make it something that people do when they are first elected and signing on, and we can try and get 100% completion of the few relatively simple questions involved. Do members have comments on the staff side of the thing, the recruitment and the profile of staff recruited. Any questions there? No. And we, yes, Billy, please.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, it doesn't seem like there would be anyone that would be able to give an answer, but I'd be interested to know if any, you know, there is an answer anywhere about why there is such an imbalance in terms of the gender split between council staff and council managers, because I think it's quite a, you know, given how, you know, a significant majority of our staff are women, and yet just slightly more than half the managers are men. So I'd be interested if there is an explanation for that, other than we're simply, you know, failing to recruit women managers at the proportion that we are recruiting women staff members.
I've been reading a lot about this recently, and I understand senior staff are undergoing training to make them aware of the possibilities of unconscious bias, and there's a lot of focus on why is it that women tend not to make it through the interview stage when they are ostensibly qualified.
Yeah, I mean, it's because, you know, that it's not far off a 50-50 split for managers. So I don't suggest that there's a, you know, crisis there, but it just does seem odd that we've got such a you know, female heavy split in the staff numbers compared to the manager numbers.
Yeah, I can take that question back to HR and circulate any answer that they give in response.
Thank you, Rosie.
Okay, thank you. And I mean, do we want to revisit this? Would shortly after the next election be the time? What's your feeling?
I think that's sensible, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Billy. Ed.
Yeah, if I may ask a question on table 4, that's another one on ethnicity data for council managers as well. That's a really big, you know, differential in numbers relative to the Merton population. Senior council managers only 12%. So that really sort of jumps out as a one where the council's not doing so well. And so we need to just wanted to ask, what's the sort of the talent management process? What's this, you know, the management succession pipeline looking like? How's that looking? And when do we expect, and how are we going to improve that number and take it up to, you know, something like the 36%, which is more representative of our population in Merton?
Shame we haven't still got Chris Lee here, isn't it?
There is some of that is addressed in paragraph 2.4 actually. So it would be good to know in a year's time whether that's been successful. Like having a BAME member of any interview panel.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, I took Chris's point. It's a fair point. Look, the problem is not with shortlisting; it's at the point at interview process. So you know, I take his point. I see the figures there. Let's see if this approach does address it, because as Ed says, it's a glaring anomaly and problem. And we are talking about small numbers, I know, but it still jumps out at you as being wrong.
Okay, we should look again. Brenda and then Billy.
It's probably thank you, Chair. It's about 10 years that I've been hearing about succession planning and actually worked on a group, with a group on this. And I don't know where we've got to, because I haven't seen any results at all. And I was going to ask the same question as Billy, because I couldn't believe that I was looking at the figures that I saw there. And BME still at the very bottom. And I just wondered, and when it says about female, what are they? Are they domestics or who are they? That 60 odd percent. I don't understand it. I'd like it to be broken down so we know what people are doing, because it's not making any sense to me. It looks like a hiding. And when we talk about it's not at the interviewing, it's at the interviewing stage and not selection, I don't agree with it at all. Because some people select on names when they get it quite wrong. And I've just been on a panel where we had 20 people that were selected, not to do with the council, to do with the college. And the names suddenly jump off the page and you think it's somebody else because it is a foreign sounding name. And the last time we discussed that, just before Floyd, just after Floyd's situation, it was said that they would screw didactic. They would cover the name so that nobody would know. But that doesn't help, because you might cover it, but you know what's under there, and the way you cover it, you can still see anyway. And so it doesn't make any sense at all. I really think that this unconscious bias, there was something in the news about that, and there is no such thing as unconscious bias. You're either conscious or you're not conscious. And so people know what they're talking about and what they're doing, but it's about changing attitude and behavior. And so, and that takes quite a lot of learning and training. And I don't see it on any of the plans that that's being addressed. So I don't know how we're going to do that. So I leave that with you to find out.
No, we need to look. I'm not sure I agree with you on unconscious bias, but it is in focus. Billy, please, and then Ed.
Thank you, Chair. And I do agree with a lot of what Brenda was saying. I think what I think is that there is such a thing as unconscious bias. I'm just not sure how much unconscious bias training deals with the problem. And so I think she's right when she says we need to see concrete changes rather than just the training. And so I wonder whether we or the HR department or the council as a whole has any actual concrete targets around the recruitment of around gender and ethnicity. I wonder, and the data is obviously given here, so I don't know if it's that the target is to match the kind of proportion of the Merton population or not. But I wonder if Rosie is going back to the HR department to get some information, if we could find out if there are actually any targets that we're working towards, because my view is that unless we have a target and the senior leadership are committed to reaching it, it's very unlikely that we will actually make concrete change in this area.
Yes, let's find that out.
Chair, can I? Oh, sorry.
Nick, please.
Look, I don't know if I'm going too far here, but obviously I've just sat on the appointments committee for both the chief executive and, of course, and I can say to members that from the recruitment process, there was a huge emphasis on equalities and the approach to equalities. So without, I'm not going too far because I was on the committee, but I can certainly say the new chief executive and all those that were interviewed had to present heavily on this very, very particular subject. And I can also say with regards to the gender that all three that made the shortlist were female. So just to give you some sort of background that there has been a lot of work in the choice of the new chief executive, and there was a large emphasis put on the equalities and the balance of the makeup of the council.
Yeah, okay. Heavy clue there from Nick. Ed.
Yeah, I'd just like to echo what Brenda was saying, really. I'm very much on her page here. I think there's an issue with the council senior management, if you like, because it's not properly representative if you look at the ethnicity data on table 4, and similarly religious diversity data as well. There's a similar sort of disproportionality, if you like. So I'm very interested in seeing the more detail on the learning and development programs and the objectives and how we make sure we've got the right learning and development to really challenge people and promote them from existing council staff, really, because you look at some of the council staff numbers, much more as a whole, much more representative, but it's when you get towards the upper echelons of management, they're less representative. So I think it's not necessarily just the initial coming to the council and work at the council stage, but once people are working at the council, there's a lot more to be done, I think, in terms of actually helping them learn and development and reach the higher echelons of the council.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, I'm going to move on. We will return to this, I think, in a year's time. The next item is the overview and scrutiny annual report, which you don't have before you, do you? So this, I think we can say, was has been delayed because we had not expected to have to produce it once at this time. What I'd like to do here, and I welcome your comments, I would like to nevertheless take this to the full council meeting in July, which is what we would normally aim to do. If we can draft that report and each section will be signed off by the chair responsible for that part, so Brenda for CYP, Peter for healthier communities and so on. And you were willing to comment, and we circulated it by email. I would prefer to do that than delay to our July meeting, because if we do that, we won't have to take it to council until September, and that really is losing a lot of time. But we'll listen to your comments on that. Has the screen frozen here, or you're just? I have to say, we don't normally go into a lot of detail at this stage because the chairs and vice chairs will have worked on their section of it.
I anticipate there might be a more vigorous debate this year. I'm happy to do that on email if you prefer. I don't mind.
Others, people happy to do this via email generally? Or?
Chair, I think you made a very sensible suggestion, and I think we should agree it and move on. Okay,
can we agree that? And I'll work with Lisanne and Rosie to get that report to you as soon as we can manage it. I'll take that as assent. Thank you. The last item we have is our annual scrutiny survey of members. Again, response a little bit disappointing because it's the second year in which we've had to do it under pandemic circumstances, and the reality is we always get a good boost for this with the council meeting in March, when we can lay around copies of the survey and people can pass the quieter moments during proceedings, filling it in and leaving it on the way out. So we didn't have that opportunity this year. We didn't last year. And as a result, the response is down to about 25 out of the 60 members. I think the results are sort of consistent, even though the base is low. And what I want to do with this, we haven't done it at this stage, is to take it back and ask Lisanne and Rosie to see how it stacks with the scrutiny improvement plan and whether there are lessons we can take from it, albeit on slightly shaky numbers to see whether we're progressing with the improvement plan. But in any comments you have on the survey results, I'd like to hear. No, okay. It's a very short read, you know. So
I don't know, Peter. Just in terms of reporting back, I guess people put narrative comments in? The council members do that when they send the. Have we got those in? You have included those, have we, at the back? Is that what the verbatim comments are from members? Oh, sorry, I'm just looking at this for the first time, this part.
Yeah, we always have done that. I think it's important that if people want to say things that are critical, that they realise that they do get reported. We're not trying to, you know, redact anything here. So it's important to include those comments.
Can I ask, what was the reason for not getting all of the papers back? Have we checked with but it's anonymous, isn't it? So you don't really, well, you do know.
It is anonymous, Brenda. I mean, we've chased it through group offices as far as we can, and we did, interestingly, when we sent out a paper version of it as opposed to the online version, which we tried initially, that did improve the response. I think people like to sit down with a bit of paper and think about their responses rather than necessarily doing it online. But as I say, the main lesson we could learn is that if we're not together much and not meeting in full council, there's just not that opportunity to give people a push and say, fill it in, please, which has always worked very well in past years.
Can I just also say there were issues with the computer, because I changed it from one computer to another computer to just to write on the paper. Usually you're supposed to be able to edit and do whatever you need to do. And it kept coming up in all different shapes. So in the end, I had to print it and wrote on it and then got it sent off that way. And that was annoying because I thought it was easier to do it on the computer if the computer is working.
No, I agree. Actually, now you mentioned that, like if you tried to put a cross in the box, it wouldn't go in the box, go beside the box. Really, the sort of things that irritate people like me disproportionately. Paul, please.
I'm not sure I have an answer to this, but I see, of course, that councillors are important stakeholders in scrutiny. They're by no means the only ones, and I do feel with the report or the survey, there's a danger of just putting disproportionate weight on what we think of our own process, and I think there's a danger in that. I think there's a real danger in that. How we actually talk to other stakeholders about how well scrutiny works, I haven't got an answer for at this moment. But at least some of us feel a bit disillusioned with the survey each time, asking us how well we've done it, basically, which I don't think is rigorous enough as a process. But as I say, I don't have a magic answer to how we go beyond that.
We could extend the, if you like, the universe for the survey without necessarily having to change its format. So we can still ask members to respond, but widen it to other stakeholders. But I think we would need then to ascertain that they had some experience of scrutiny to make it worth their while to basically to engage with it.
The trouble is everyone who's close by has a vested interest somewhere about the scrutiny. It's quite difficult to have that dispassionate view of how well it worked in Merton, just asking us about it.
Yeah, like marking our own homework, I know. So,
change the questions to open questions.
Well, Ed, please.
Well, thank you, Peter. I was just going to say support from the scrutiny team. That's a really good performance there. It's in great satisfaction. Everyone's either totally satisfied or very good kind of thing. So I'd like to say big thanks to the likes of Rosie, Lisanne, Stella, and everyone. They all do an absolutely fantastic job. And sometimes the debate between us gets a little bit heated, but they're always very calm and professional and provide data and answer our questions and that sort of thing, and respond afterwards and things like that. So big thanks to the officers.
Yes, thank you for that, Ed. And of course, when we get to the written annual report, I'll be endorsing your views, and those of all members, I hope, of the commission. Yeah. Good. Nice note to close on, unless people have other points they want to make. No? Right. So I wish you all good night, and thank you for your participation this evening. And looks like next time we meet, it will indeed be in real life. That'll be a novelty.
Thank you, Peter.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye. Adila.